I still remember that night as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The kind of night where silence has its own sound. The kind that lingers in the air long after everything has gone still. I was lying on my couch, wrapped in a light blanket, flipping through channels aimlessly, not really watching anything. My husband was out of town for a business trip, and our teenage daughter, Nita, had fallen asleep hours ago. It was just past midnight. The moonlight poured through the curtains in slanted streams, and everything was peaceful, until it wasn't. We live in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Neat houses with trimmed lawns and families who mostly keep to themselves. My closest neighbor, Mrs. Linda Wexley, lived just 2 doors down. A sweet, reserved woman in her early 60s, with silver hair always tied up in a neat bun and a soft voice that reminded me of lullabies. She had moved into the neighborhood a few years ago after losing her husband, and although we weren't best friends, I checked in on her every now and then, brought her soup when she was sick, or helped her carry groceries. That night, as I switched off the TV and stood up to head to bed, I heard something. A strange, muffled sound. At first, I thought it was coming from the pipes or maybe some neighborhood kids messing around. But then it came again. This time, clearer. A dragging noise followed by a faint, desperate thump. It was so subtle that most people would have ignored it. But something in my gut told me this wasn't normal. I stood frozen in the hallway, listening, trying to pinpoint where it came from. The sound repeated once more. That dragging. That thump. It was coming from outside. Without thinking twice, I slipped into my sneakers, grabbed a flashlight, and tiptoed outside, careful not to wake Nita. As I stepped into the yard, the cold breeze kissed my skin. I looked toward Linda's house and saw her porch light flickering oddly, as though someone had tried to turn it on but failed. That was when I knew. I didn't have solid proof, no evidence of anything wrong, but my heart was pounding like I had just run a marathon. I made my way to her front door and knocked gently. "Mrs. Linda?" I called. No answer. "It's Maywish from 2 doors down. Are you okay?" I knocked louder. Still nothing. I turned the doorknob gently. It was unlocked. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt thick. The house was dimly lit, and a musty smell hung in the air. I walked further in, calling out her name again. That's when I heard it, another faint thud, followed by a weak groan. My hands trembled as I followed the sound into the hallway and then to her kitchen. Linda was lying on the floor, half conscious, clutching her chest with one hand while the other was desperately reaching out for something. Her face was pale, drenched in sweat. Her lips were trembling, and I could barely hear her breath. It didn't take a doctor to know she was having a heart attack. I rushed to her side, dropped to my knees, and held her hand. "You're going to be okay. I'm here," I whispered, trying to stay calm though my own heart was threatening to leap out of my chest. I dialed emergency services and explained everything. They told me to keep her awake, to talk to her, and most importantly, not to move her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, barely audible. "Didn't mean to cause trouble." No, I said, brushing the wet strands of hair from her forehead. "You're not trouble. Just stay with me, okay?" The 10 minutes it took for the paramedics to arrive felt like an eternity. I sat there on the cold floor holding her hand, whispering words of comfort, sharing stories of silly things my daughter did last week, anything to keep her conscious. When the medics finally burst through the door, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. They worked quickly, professionally, asking me questions while simultaneously checking her vitals. I stepped back, allowing them to work, silently praying as they lifted her onto a stretcher and wheeled her out. I followed the ambulance in my car, my hands trembling so much I could barely hold the steering wheel. The hospital waiting room was cold and sterile, but the emotions swirling inside me were the opposite, warm, fierce, and full of fear. I called Linda's only daughter, who lived out of state. Thankfully, she picked up immediately and booked the next flight. After what felt like a lifetime, a doctor finally came out and told me that I had saved Linda's life. "If you hadn't gotten to her when you did," he said solemnly, "it might have been too late." I sat there in stunned silence. Tears welled up in my eyes, not just out of relief, but out of overwhelming gratitude. What if I hadn't heard that sound? What if I had ignored it like just another noise in the night?